The scissors flashed under the reception lights before I understood my sister was actually running at me. "That baby was supposed to be mine," Lauren screamed. I stumbled backward, one hand covering my 6-month belly. My husband moved between us just as security grabbed her. For one stupid second, I thought my mother would come to me. Instead, she seized my arm. "Stop making this worse." My father pointed at me like I was the problem. "Apologize to your sister." By the time the police finished taking my statement, Mom was already worried about donors, the board, and who had seen what. I didn't know it yet, but Lauren's scissors weren't the biggest betrayal waiting for me. 3 hours later, I opened a Bridge Forward board report and found my name approving something I had never seen. 6 hours earlier, I had been standing beneath strings of warm white lights in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, trying not to cry over a cake. Not because anything was wrong with it, because everything, for once, seemed right. Noah stood beside me with his hand resting lightly against my back. He had been doing that more often since my belly had become impossible to ignore. As if some part of him still couldn't believe there were 3 of us now. "You're doing the face," he whispered. "What face?" "The one where you're about to cry and pretend you have something in your eye." "I'm pregnant. I'm allowed to cry over buttercream." "You cried over a parking space yesterday." "It was a very good parking space." He laughed, and for a few seconds I forgot to scan the room. That was unusual for me. I had spent most of my adult life scanning rooms. Who needed something? What had been forgotten? Which deadline was about to become an emergency? Whether my mother was smiling too brightly at a donor, whether Lauren was about to arrive late and somehow still become the center of attention. At 40, I was good at noticing what other people missed. At Bridge Forward, that skill had become my profession. At home, my family had always called it a personality problem. "You overthink everything, Maya. You're too rigid. You always have to check." The irony was that when something went wrong, they called me first. I was director of grants administration at Bridge Forward, the nonprofit my mother had founded 21 years earlier to help women return to the workforce after caregiving gaps, divorce, illness, or financial crisis. Mom was the visionary. Lauren was the face. I was the person who made sure restricted funds stayed restricted, reports went out on time, and promises made in fundraising speeches could survive contact with an auditor. No one put that on a gala banner. But I had made peace with it. Or I thought I had. My mother tapped a spoon against her champagne glass. The room softened into silence. I felt Noah's hand shift against my back. "Here we go," I murmured. Mom loved a microphone almost as much as she loved saying she hated attention. Diane Reynolds stood near our head table in a silver dress that caught every light in the room. Most of them did. "When Maya was a little girl," she began, "she used to organize the other children at birthday parties." A few people laughed. I smiled automatically. "She never wanted the spotlight," Mom continued. "She wanted to make sure the cake arrived, the candles were counted, and everybody had a chair." More laughter. Noah glanced at me. He knew that story. He also knew Mom told it, as if my entire personality had been assigned at age 7. "And now," she said, "our Maya is beginning an extraordinary new chapter." Her eyes dropped to my stomach. Something in me tightened. I had specifically asked my mother not to turn my pregnancy into a Bridge Forward talking point. She had nodded. Apparently, that had not meant yes. Seeing my daughter step into motherhood at this stage of her career reminds me exactly why our next initiative matters so deeply. I stopped smiling. Across the room, Lauren did too. Mom continued. "Next chapter, mothers will help women understand that motherhood does not mean disappearing from professional life. It means writing the next chapter on your own terms." There was applause. Not huge, but enough. My wedding reception had just become a soft launch. I felt Noah's thumb move once against my back. He didn't need to say anything. I knew what he was asking. "Do you want me to stop this?" I shook my head almost imperceptibly. "Not here. Not now." That was my reflex. Keep the moment intact. Deal with the damage later. Mom raised her glass toward me. "To Maya, Noah, and the next generation." Everyone drank. Everyone except Lauren. My sister stood near the far end of the room holding a glass she wasn't drinking from. Her face looked wrong. Not angry exactly. Stripped. As if someone had taken something from her in front of a room full of witnesses. I knew next chapter mothers mattered to her. For almost a year, Mom had been positioning Lauren to lead its public launch. Lauren was director of brand and community partnerships. She was good at it, too. Better than I was at 100 things that required walking into a room and making strangers feel like they already knew her. She could remember donors' children's names. She could turn a panel discussion into a story people quoted later. She understood social media without treating it like a disease. The problem was that Mom had spent years turning Lauren's strengths into proof that she deserved things the rest of us had to earn. Lauren received visibility. I received responsibility. When visibility went wrong, responsibility somehow became mine too. Still, even knowing all that, I didn't understand the look on her face. Not yet. I turned back toward Noah. Remind me later that my mother promised not to do that. I have witnesses. Apparently, so does she. That line would come back to me later. At the time, it was a joke. 20 minutes after the toast, I went toward the bridal suite because one of my shoes had started cutting into my heel. I was halfway down the hallway when Lauren stepped out from behind a decorative divider. Maya. I stopped. Her voice sounded thin. I looked past her toward the reception room. You okay? She laughed once. It was not a happy sound. You really don't know? Know what? That was mine. I frowned. What was? She stared at my stomach. My hand went there automatically. Lauren. Mom built the whole thing around me. The initiative? The future. I didn't understand what that meant. And before I could ask, she stepped into the bridal suite. I followed because she was my sister, because I had spent 36 years following her into emotional fires, and because I still believed every family crisis could be solved if somebody stayed calm long enough. The room smelled faintly of hairspray and roses. A garment bag hung over the back of a chair. Near the mirror sat the emergency sewing kit the stylist had left behind. Lauren paced once, then twice. She told me I was finally going to have something that was mine. You have a job, Lauren. You know that's not what I mean. No, I actually don't. She said, next chapter Mothers was mine. She said I'd lead it. She said this was the thing that would prove I was ready. For what? Her mouth tightened. I already knew the answer before she said it. To take over. I stared at her. Mom had never told me that. Not directly. But that didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Bridge Forward had always operated on two systems. The official one, where jobs had descriptions and budgets had approval chains. And the family one, where Mom made promises over dinner and everyone else discovered them after they had hardened into expectations. Lauren, if Mom promised you a promotion, that is between you and Mom. She didn't just promise me a promotion. What else? She said I would be the next Reynolds woman people saw when they thought about Bridge Forward. I felt tired all at once. This is my wedding. You think I don't know that? I think I'm standing here in a wedding dress having a succession argument I didn't know existed. Her eyes filled. For half a second, I saw my little sister. Then shook at my stomach again. And now she's using you. I didn't ask her to. You never have to ask. Something in her voice changed. You just get it. I almost laughed because the sentence was so completely backward that I didn't know where to begin. I got what? The grant reports nobody wanted? The midnight calls? The budget meetings where Lauren arrived with a campaign idea and I explained why restricted funds couldn't magically pay for it? But before I could answer, she grabbed the emergency sewing kit. I saw the metal before I understood the movement. A pair of heavy fabric scissors. Lauren. She pulled them free. My body reacted faster than my mind. I stepped backward. Put those down. That baby was supposed to be mine. Then she came toward me. Not slowly. Not theatrically. She ran. I screamed. Noah later told me he heard my voice from halfway down the corridor. All I remember is moving backward and one hand clamping over my stomach so hard it hurt. The door swung open. Noah hit the space between us just as two venue security officers grabbed Lauren from the side. The scissors struck the floor. The sound was small, almost ridiculous. Metal against wood. A click. That was all. Then everyone was shouting. Lauren, crying. Security telling her not to move. Noah asking me if she had touched me. my mother rushing in. And for one absurd second I thought, Mom is coming to me. She wasn't. She grabbed my wrist. Maya. Stop. I stared at her. Stop what? Stop making this worse. I looked at my sister being held several feet away. She ran at me with scissors. She is having some kind of breakdown. Dad appeared behind Mom. What the hell happened? Lauren sobbed. Mom said, it got out of hand. I said, she came at my stomach with scissors. Dad turned to me. Not Lauren. Me. You're standing. The baby is fine. Stop dramatizing and apologize to your sister before this becomes a spectacle. The hallway went silent around us. Not completely. I could still hear the wedding music through the wall, but the people near us stopped pretending not to listen. My father's words landed somewhere old inside me. Apologize. The family emergency button. Lauren broke something? Maya apologized for making her feel guilty. Mom crossed a line. Maya apologized for bringing it up at the wrong time. Dad shouted. Maya apologized for provoking him. I opened my mouth. The old reflex was already there. Then I saw the scissors on the floor. And I closed it. No. Dad blinked. What? I'm not apologizing. Mom's grip tightened on my wrist. The venue manager arrived with another security officer. We've called 911. Mom turned. That isn't necessary. The manager didn't argue with her. There was a weapon involved. We have an incident protocol. My daughter is having an emotional crisis. I understand. You don't need police here. They're already on the way. Mom's face changed. Not much. A slight tightening around the mouth. Then she looked past the manager toward the reception room. Who saw this? That was the moment. Not the scissors. Not Dad telling me to apologize. That question. Who saw this? Not. Are you hurt? Not. Is the baby okay? Who saw this? I looked at my mother and felt something inside me shift half an inch. Not break. Not yet. Just move. Like a picture frame that had been crooked for years and I had finally noticed. The police separated us. I gave my own statement. When Dad tried to interrupt from several yards away, I looked at the officer and said, I want my statement recorded from me. The officer nodded. Noah stayed beside me, but he never answered for me. I described the bridal suite, the argument, the scissors, my position. Lauren's words. I didn't guess what she intended. I didn't say she wanted to kill me. I didn't say she would have hurt the baby if Noah hadn't come in. I said what I knew. She picked up scissors. She ran toward me. She shouted the sentence. Security intervened. That was enough. By the time we reached the maternity unit for a precautionary evaluation, my entire body had begun shaking. Not dramatically. Not visibly at first. My hands simply would not warm up. Noah sat beside me while a nurse checked me and the baby. No gore. No catastrophe. No cinematic medical scare. Just the terrible, ordinary vulnerability of lying under hospital lights while somebody checked whether fear had changed anything inside your body. Eventually, we were told there were no immediate signs of a serious problem. I almost cried harder at that than I had at the wedding. Noah kissed my forehead. You don't have to decide anything tonight. I know. You don't have to answer them either. I looked at my phone. 19 missed calls from Mom. 7 from Dad. 3 from Lauren. Then a text from Mom. Do not talk to donors or anyone on the board before we decide how the family is handling this. I read it twice. Then again. Noah watched my face. What? I handed him the phone. He read it. Why is she talking about the board? I don't know. But that wasn't exactly true. I knew how my mother's mind worked. Bridge Forward was not simply her job. It was her identity, her social world, her proof that every sacrifice she had ever made meant something. The organization employed more than 60 people directly and funded programs serving hundreds of women every year. And Mom had spent 21 years making herself inseparable from it. A scandal involving both daughters at one daughter's wedding? To her, that was not family pain. That was reputational exposure. I took my phone back. On the way home, I saved the police incident number, the venue manager's name, and the approximate time the security team had entered the hallway. Not because I was plotting anything. Because documentation was how I kept myself from being told later that something had happened differently. That habit had started at work. I was beginning to realize I might have learned it at home. The next afternoon, Mom asked to come over. I said Lauren could not come. That alone triggered 15 minutes of argument. She wants to apologize. She can do that by video. She's your sister. She ran at me with scissors. She was not herself. Then she should not be in my apartment. Eventually, Mom arrived with Dad. Lauren appeared on a scheduled video call. Noah sat at the far end of the room and said almost nothing. Mom placed a folder on our coffee table. That should have warned me. My mother never arrived with a folder unless she wanted something to become official. What is that? I asked. A family resolution. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because only my mother could turn attempted wedding damage control into something with a title. It is not a legal threat, she said quickly. I didn't say it was. It simply sets expectations so everyone knows how we move forward. I opened it. The language was polished. Careful. It did not ask me to withdraw my police statement. It did not say Lauren had never threatened me. It did not ask me to lie to anyone. Instead, it said I did not presently intend to seek additional action beyond cooperating with whatever lawful process had already begun. It said I would not voluntarily discuss the incident with donors or media. It said family contact with Lauren would be handled privately. There were exceptions for subpoenas, safety obligations, legal requirements, and professional duties. On paper, it was almost reasonable. That made it worse. Mom leaned forward. This protects everyone without asking you to lie. Dad nodded. Your mother has staff depending on her. Donors. Benefits. Our retirement plan is tied to her staying where she is for the next few years. This does not exist in a vacuum. I looked at him. Our retirement plan? He seemed irritated that I had caught the phrase. That isn't the point. It sounded like the point. Lauren's face appeared on the laptop screen. I already said I shouldn't have grabbed the scissors. I stared at her. That is not the same as taking responsibility. What do you want me to do? Crawl? No. Mom cut in. Nobody is asking anyone to crawl. We are trying to make sure one terrible moment doesn't destroy 5 other things. I looked back at the document. Confidentiality. No voluntary disclosure to donors. Private handling. Reasonable exceptions. I read the clause twice. Then I asked, if the board asks me whether something happened at an event where donors or board members were present, what am I supposed to say? Mom's answer came too quickly. You say it was handled privately. That isn't what I asked. That is the responsible answer. What if they ask what happened? Her jaw tightened. Maya, what if they ask? You tell them the family resolved it. But we haven't. Lauren groaned through the screen. Oh my God. I ignored her. Mom said, you are looking for traps because you are upset. No. I'm reading what you brought me. You are turning words into weapons. I set the paper down. No. Mom leaned back. No what? I'm not signing. Dad exhaled sharply. Maya, I don't know what I may be legally, professionally, or ethically required to say later. I'm not promising silence now so everyone else can feel safer. Mom's eyes hardened. This is exactly what I mean. You always have to make everything technical. For years, that sentence had worked on me. It made me feel cold, difficult, ungenerous. This time, I looked at the folder between us. You brought me a written agreement. No one spoke. For the first time all afternoon, Noah looked down because he was trying not to smile. Mom gathered the papers. You are being vindictive in legal language. I'm not signing. Dad stood. Then I hope you're ready for what happens when this gets bigger than you. That frightened me. It did, but I let them leave. After the door closed, I stood in the silent apartment with one hand on my stomach. My old instinct screamed after them. Fix it. Call Mom. Explain. Make sure Dad isn't angry. Tell Lauren you love her. Instead, I walked into our small home office and opened my work laptop. I still had an active account. I had a grant reporting deadline the next morning, and if there was one thing I knew how to do, it was work while my personal life burned. That sentence should have embarrassed me. At the time, it comforted me. I opened the latest board finance packet because I needed to cross-check an outreach allocation against a restricted grant. Halfway down the executive summary, I stopped. Community outreach reclassification reviewed and approved by Grants Administration. I read it again, then checked the footnote. My department. My review function. I had never seen the reclassification. I opened the document history. Finalized 3 days before my wedding. I opened the distribution list. Then the prior version. The draft language said, pending grants review. 46 minutes later, in the final version, it said, Grants Administration reviewed and approved. My fingers went cold. Not because I knew what it meant. Because I didn't. And because, for once, I refused to fill the gap with an excuse for my family. I copied the document ID into my working notes. Then the version number. Then the timestamp. I checked the distribution trail. I had not received the pre-final draft. I opened the previous board packet. Same phrase. Reviewed and approved. I searched my email. That one had reached me only after the summary had already been finalized. A third packet. Again. Same wording. I sat back. Noah appeared in the doorway. You okay? I don't know. He came closer, but did not touch the laptop. What did you find? I looked at the 3 document IDs on my screen. My name. He waited. Where it shouldn't be. I opened a blank table. Packet. Date. Official wording. Evidence of review. Missing trail. I entered the first line. Then the second. Then the third. By midnight, the wedding no longer felt like the only thing in my life that had gone wrong. It felt like the thing that had finally made me look. And by midnight, I had found my name on 3 approvals I had never given. Sleep lasted less than 3 hours. At 5:20 the next morning, the 3 document numbers were still waiting on my screen. I had not dreamed them. That mattered more than it should have. For most of my life, discomfort around my mother followed a familiar cycle. Something happened. I reacted. She explained why my reaction was the real problem. By morning, I was usually rewriting the event for her in my own head. Maybe she was under pressure. Maybe Lauren had needed more support. Maybe Dad was right, and I had made something larger than it needed to be. Numbers were harder to soften. A document finalized at 4:17 was still finalized at 4:17 after a night of guilt. A distribution list did not suddenly include me because Mom sounded disappointed. The sentence on the first board packet still said, Grants Administration had reviewed and approved a reclassification I had never seen. So before doing anything else, I made rules for myself. No guessing. No downloading whole folders. No searching through employee files or donor records because I was angry. No writing words like fraud, falsified, or scheme when I could not prove them. Only what belonged to my work. Only what I had a legitimate reason to access. Only what I could explain later without needing to say. I was trying to catch my mother. The first 3 packets gave me somewhere to start. Their titles were different, but the expense categories shared a pattern. Community outreach, program visibility, education campaign support. I knew those labels because I had spent years explaining the difference between expenses that genuinely advanced a funded program and expenses that made the organization look good while doing it. The distinction was not always dramatic. Sometimes the same event contained both. That was why classification mattered. A photography package could support program delivery if it documented participants for an approved curriculum. The same photography package could be branding if its real purpose was donor promotion. Neither category was automatically wrong. Calling one the other without review was the problem. One line caught my attention. A video production package connected to next chapter mothers. Another included sponsored panel costs. A third referenced campaign photography and community engagement consulting. Lauren's territory. That did not mean Lauren had changed anything. I wrote that sentence in my notes. Lauren benefits from campaign visibility. No evidence she altered records. Seeing it written there irritated me. Not because it was false. Because part of me wanted something simpler. Lauren had come at me with scissors. It would have been emotionally convenient if every ugly thing led straight back to her. Convenience was not evidence. I checked the version number on the second packet. Then the third. The first had changed from pending grants review to reviewed and approved shortly before finalization. The second had no obvious wording change in the version visible to me, but its distribution trail showed I had received the file after the board summary had already been closed. The third had never reached my inbox before the meeting date. 3 different inconsistencies. 1 repeated result. My department appeared to have done work there was no trace of me doing. At 6:12, Noah appeared in the doorway, wearing yesterday's t-shirt and carrying 2 mugs. "You're supposed to be sleeping. So are you. I'm not the pregnant one. Thank you for the update." He set a mug beside me and looked at the screen without leaning closer. "Still 3? 3 I can identify without wandering outside my lane. What does that mean?" "It means I'm not going to turn myself into the thing they'll accuse me of being." His eyebrows lifted. "And what thing is that?" "The angry daughter who went digging because she wanted revenge." Noah pulled out the other chair. "You know that's not what you're doing." "I know what I think I'm doing." That distinction silenced both of us for a moment. The light coming through the blinds was gray and thin. Brooklyn looked washed clean outside our window, which felt insulting. "The city should have looked different after your sister ran at your unborn child with scissors." Apparently, cities did not care. I turned the laptop toward myself again. "There's a whistleblower policy." Noah waited. "I've trained managers on it." "Can you use it?" "Yes." The answer came quickly. The decision did not. Bridge Forward's policy had always been something I explained to other people. It existed for suspected misuse of funds, inaccurate reporting, retaliation concerns, governance failures, conflicts of interest. Good faith concerns went through a protected internal channel. I had written parts of the training language myself. Using it against a process controlled by my own mother felt entirely different. A familiar thought surfaced immediately. What if this could be fixed quietly? Then another. That was exactly what Mom had asked me to do at the wedding. My hand moved to the keyboard. "I'm going to report the record problem." Noah nodded once. "Not approval. Not permission. Just acknowledgement." "What do you need from me?" "Breakfast." "I can do that. And don't let me talk myself out of sending it while you're gone." "That one sounds more complicated." "It is." He stood. "I'll make eggs slowly." After he left the room, I opened the secure reporting page. The form asked for a description. My fingers hovered above the keys. The first version I typed was too emotional. I deleted it. The second sounded defensive. Deleted that too. On the third try, I wrote only what I could stand behind. "I dispute that Grants administration reviewed or approved the following board materials. I have identified document and version records where final board language represents Grants review that I do not recall performing and for which I have not located a supporting review trail. I am requesting preservation of the listed records, while the appropriate governance body determines whether the board record is accurate." Below that, I entered the 3 document identifiers, relevant dates, version references, and the distribution issues I had already confirmed. No accusation. No wedding. No Lauren. No Mom. Just the problem. My cursor stopped over submit. That old voice came back. A good daughter would call first. A good employee would ask her boss. A good sister would wait until everyone calmed down. For years, good had meant giving someone else time to move the furniture before I walked into the room. I clicked submit. The confirmation page appeared. My breathing changed. Nothing else did. No alarms. No instant collapse of Bridge Forward. Just a reference number. I copied it into my notes. At 7:38, an email arrived from Elaine Porter. "Maya, I received the report. Are you available for a brief call this morning?" My stomach tightened anyway. Elaine chaired audit and governance, but we were not close. She had a way of asking questions that made people stop decorating their answers. At 8:15, her face appeared on my screen. Short silver hair, dark glasses. No small talk beyond asking whether I was physically all right after the wedding. "I'm stable," I said. "That is all I need to know about the wedding unless it becomes relevant to this report." Relief moved through me so quickly, I almost laughed. "Thank you." Elaine glanced down at something off-screen. "You listed 3 document IDs." "Yes." "Did you copy any confidential files to a personal device?" "No." "Forward donor records to yourself?" "No." "Download the archive?" "No." "What did you retain?" "Identifiers, version numbers, dates, distribution information visible through my normal access, notes about what I personally reviewed." She nodded. "Good. Do not expand your search on your own. That surprised me. I thought you'd want me to find everything. I want the organization to preserve everything relevant. That is not the same thing. Her tone stayed flat. You have raised a good faith concern under the whistleblower policy. I will route the document list through the policy process so the relevant records can be held. The board secretary and the appropriate records custodian will handle preservation. A pressure I had not realized I was carrying eased slightly. Then Elaine added, preservation is not a conclusion. I understand. It does not mean the records are wrong. I understand that too. What exactly are you saying at this point? The question was simple. I took my time anyway. I'm saying the board was told Grant's administration reviewed things I did not review. Anything else? No. You think you know who caused that? I have suspicions. I did not ask what you suspect. The corner of my mouth almost moved. No, I don't know who caused it. Good. She looked at me through the screen. Keep it that narrow. The call lasted 11 minutes. For the first time since the wedding, somebody had heard something disturbing without immediately asking me to make it smaller. That feeling was so unfamiliar it scared me almost as much as the records. The administrative leave email arrived 2 hours and 14 minutes after my report confirmation. I knew the interval because I wrote it down. Effective immediately. Maya Reynolds will be placed on paid administrative leave while the organization supports her recovery following the recent personal incident and reviews potential conflicts arising from an internal governance concern. System access will be suspended during this period. The wording was smooth, almost kind. My laptop disconnected before I finished reading the second paragraph. A box appeared. Your session has expired. Please contact your administrator. For several seconds, I simply looked at it. Then my personal phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. A text followed. This is what happens when you turn a family problem into a work problem. My eyes went from her message to the time on the whistleblower confirmation. The work records predated my wedding. That fact steadied me. I opened my personal chronology and entered. Protected internal report acknowledged. Then beneath it, paid administrative leave notice received 2 hours 14 minutes later. Access suspended. I did not type retaliation. I did not know whether it was retaliation. I typed what happened. That was enough. Lauren asked for a video call that afternoon. My first instinct was no. Then I thought about her sentence at the wedding. That baby was supposed to be mine. Understanding it would not excuse what she had done. But I needed to know whether there was something I had missed that connected her to the work records. I agreed to 20 minutes. No in-person visit. No showing up at our apartment. No Noah speaking for me. Lauren appeared on my screen without makeup, hair pulled into a messy knot. For most of our lives, that version of her had been reserved for me. Private Lauren. The sister who came to my room after Mom yelled at her. The sister who borrowed my clothes and never returned them. The sister who once slept beside me on the floor when Dad was in the hospital because neither of us wanted to go home. That history did something dangerous. It made boundaries feel like betrayal. Lauren spoke first. I'm sorry. I waited. For the scissors. Still I waited. Her face tightened. What do you want me to say? The truth would be useful. I told the police what happened. I'm not talking about them. Then what? That sentence. She looked away. My voice stayed level. You said my baby was supposed to be yours. That isn't what I meant. Then tell me what you meant. Lauren rubbed both hands over her face. Mom built the entire next year around me. The initiative? The initiative. The campaign. The promotion. That was the first time she had used that word. What promotion? Her eyes came back to mine. You really didn't know? No. She told me after the spring gala that if Next Chapter Mothers launched well, I'd move into a vice president level role. Then chief advancement officer after that if the board approved the restructuring. I absorbed that. Mom had mentioned a possible advancement restructure. She had never said Lauren was already being promised a path through it. Lauren continued. She kept talking about how the program needed a real story behind it. A Reynolds story. What does that mean? You know how she is. No, tell me. A pause. Then Lauren said. She kept saying when I had a baby, we'd have this whole natural next generation story. Founder, daughter, Motherhood, career, all of it. Something unpleasant settled in my stomach. And you believed that was guaranteed. She made it sound guaranteed. Jobs aren't inherited because someone has a baby. I know that. Do you? Her mouth opened. Closed. I kept going. Because you ran at me with scissors after Mom mentioned my pregnancy in a speech. Lauren's voice sharpened. She took it from me in front of everyone. What did I take? My future. You just told me Mom promised it. You were standing there. At my wedding. You always do this. Do what? Act like because you didn't ask for something, it doesn't count when you get it. That sentence hit an old nerve. For years, Lauren had looked at my responsibilities and seen authority. I had looked at her privileges and seen affection. Maybe both of us had been trained to misunderstand what the other one actually received. But only one of us had picked up scissors. You said the baby was supposed to be yours, I repeated. Lauren's shoulders dropped. I didn't mean your child literally belonged to me. Then what? That whole future Mom kept promising me. The initiative, the promotion, being the one she brought forward next. The grandmother thing. The next generation thing. All of it, her voice cracked. That was supposed to be mine. For the first time, the sentence made sense. It did not become less ugly. It became more adult. Money, position, succession, status. A public role my mother had apparently wrapped around the possibility of Lauren becoming a mother. Pregnancy had not created Lauren's entitlement. It had exposed how much had already been attached to it. You picked up scissors and ran at me, I said. That future did not make you do that, she swallowed. I know. Do you? Yes. I studied her face. There was no reliable test for sincerity on a laptop screen. So I stopped trying. Here is what happens now. You don't come to my apartment. You don't come to wherever I'm working. If we talk, we schedule it first. Maya. No. Her jaw tightened. You're treating me like I'm dangerous. You behaved dangerously. The words sat between us. Lauren looked away again. This time, I did not rescue her from the discomfort. The call ended 3 minutes early. Dad called before dinner. I almost ignored him. Then curiosity won. He did not ask how the baby was. He began with money. Do you understand what happens if your mother loses her position? Hello to you too. I'm serious. So am I. We have a retirement plan. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What does my governance report have to do with your retirement? Diane planned to stay another 4 or 5 years. Her benefits matter. Her salary matters. We structured things around that. There it was again. Structured. Planned. Expected. Everyone in my family seemed to have a future built on something I was not supposed to disturb, Dad continued. If this turns into some bored circus and they force her out early, we would have to rethink everything. Downsize? Possibly. Change insurance? Possibly. Spend less? His voice hardened. That is not the point. It sounds exactly like the point. The point is that your mother's job is not just a title, it is our life. I closed my eyes briefly. For decades, Dad had presented himself as the reasonable one. Mom felt too deeply. Lauren reacted too strongly. Maya. Be sensible. Maya, give it a week. Maya, apologize because you can handle it. That role had allowed him to sound neutral while consistently asking the same person to pay for peace. Me. So, when you tell me to let this go? I said. You're not asking for peace. Maya. You're asking me to protect your plan. That is an incredibly selfish way to put it. Maybe once that word would have sent me into a 20-minute explanation. This time, it barely moved me. You called me. Dad went quiet. Was there anything else? You're becoming very hard. No. I'm becoming specific. He hung up first. My hands shook afterward. Boundaries were strange that way. You could know you had done the right thing and still feel physically as if you had stepped off a roof. Noah found me staring into the refrigerator. You looking for something? Evidence that cheese still exists. He reached past me. Confirmed. I laughed despite myself. That evening, Elaine emailed asking whether I could speak for 5 minutes. The whistleblower policy process had logged my concern, she told me. The preservation hold had been routed through the appropriate board and records channels for the document IDs I had identified. You don't need to do anything with the system, she said. Your access should remain suspended while this is reviewed. It is. There is one point I can confirm from the preservation metadata without getting ahead of the process. My grip tightened around the phone. What? One of the material version changes you flagged came through an executive office workflow. The room seemed to sharpen. Lauren? I'm not going to speculate. You said executive office. I said the workflow. I forced myself to slow down. Was it her user account? No. That was all Elaine would give me. It was enough. Lauren benefited from the campaign. Lauren had believed the initiative, the promotion, even the next chapter of our family belonged to her. But the record I had flagged had not been changed through her account. After the call ended, my notes lay open on the dining table. At the top of the page, I had written Lauren's name that morning. Beside it, possible source? I drew one line through the question. Not because Lauren was innocent. She wasn't. Not because I knew who had changed the wording. I didn't. But because the direction had shifted. For the first time, I stopped asking what my sister had done with my name. I started asking what my mother had. Once I started asking what my mother had done with my name, the hardest part was not finding answers. It was refusing to invent them. The next morning, Elaine sent me a calendar invitation for a committee interview. The wording was deliberately plain. Review of reported governance concern. No accusation. No conclusion. No reference to mom. That helped. By then, my Bridge Forward account had been suspended for almost 2 days. The blank login screen bothered me more than I wanted to admit. For 11 years, that system had been the place where I knew exactly what I was doing. At home, everything felt less measurable. My sister had come at my pregnancy with scissors. My parents thought my refusal to bury it was an attack on them. My mother had apparently promised Lormine a future inside Bridge Forward that I had never been told existed. Now, official documents claimed I had approved work I had not performed. The temptation was to arrange all of those facts into one clean story. Mom planned everything. Lauren knew everything. Dad helped hide everything. That would have made my anger easier. It also would have been dishonest. So before meeting Elaine, I placed 4 things on our dining table. My personal calendar. The document ID index I had created before my access was suspended. Copies of grant reports I had authored and was permitted to retain. And a notebook. No downloaded archive. No files someone could later say I had taken improperly. No screenshots from systems I no longer had authorization to enter. No private messages stolen from anyone's account. Just my own work and the identifiers of records I had already flagged. Noah came out of the bedroom adjusting his tie. You're up early. I have the committee interview at 9. He looked at the table. That all you're taking? That's all I can defend taking. He nodded. Then he reached for the coffee pot. I watched him for a moment. You don't think I'm being ridiculous? He turned. Do you want reassurance or an answer? Answer. I think 3 records saying you approved something you didn't approve deserves a question. That wasn't what I asked. I know. He poured coffee. You want me to tell you your mother did it? My throat tightened. Yes. I can't. That was why I loved him. Not because he always believed the worst thing I feared. Because he could stand beside me without pretending uncertainty had disappeared. Good, I said. Good? If you had said yes, I would have spent the rest of the morning wondering whether I had talked you into it. He handed me the mug. Then maybe stop trying to make everyone reach the conclusion before the records do. I hated how useful that was. At 9, Elaine appeared on my screen from a small office I had seen only twice before. No conference room. No lawyer seated beside her. No dramatic stack of files. Just Elaine, a legal pad, and the expression she wore at audit meetings when somebody used too many adjectives. Before we begin, she said, your system access remains suspended. I know. You should not attempt to regain it, or ask another employee to retrieve records for you. I haven't. If I show you preserved material during this review, that does not authorize you to copy it outside the process. Understood. Then she looked at my document list. You identified 3 items initially. Yes. Walk me through the first one. A preserved version appeared on the secure screen share. The sentence was exactly as I remembered it. Grant's administration reviewed and approved the outreach reclassification. Elaine asked. Did you review this? No. How do you know? Because I keep review notes for restricted fund classifications, and this item does not appear in them. That proves you don't have a note. Anything else? My calendar shows I was in a funder compliance call during the window when the final version was completed. That does not prove you could not have reviewed it before or after. No. What does? I looked at the distribution record. The draft wasn't sent to me before finalization. Elaine waited. So state only that. A small embarrassment burned through me. Not because she was wrong. Because I had spent my career telling other people exactly the same thing. Facts first. Then, conclusions. I did not receive the draft before finalization, I said. Good. Next. The second packet was easier. It had been sent to me. But the timestamp showed the message arrived after the board summary had already been locked. I could not have approved the final summary before it was finalized if I received the supporting material afterward. Elaine made a note. Better. The third record showed no pre-final distribution to me at all. By the time we finished, my palms were damp. Not from fear. From concentration. For years, I had sat in rooms where my mother spoke in purpose. We help women. We build futures. We cannot let bureaucracy stand in the way of impact. Elaine spoke in records. Who received it? When? What did the official language say? What can you actually prove? The difference felt almost physical. Anything else? Elaine asked. One thing. Yes. My department gets used as a review function in these summaries. I can see that. If the review did not happen, then the problem isn't simply that my name appears where it shouldn't. What is the problem? I chose the wording carefully. The board may have believed a control occurred when it didn't. Elaine looked at me for a long second. Then she nodded once. That is the question worth testing. That afternoon, the committee expanded the sample. Not because I asked them to search everything. Elaine told me they were looking at a limited period tied to the same kinds of reclassifications. 6 board packets. 4 outreach adjustments. 3 grant reporting periods. I knew only what she showed me during the next interview. 4 of the records said grants had reviewed the relevant classification. 1 had a clear review trail with my notes and email approval attached. That one was real. The other 3 did not. 1 lacked any pre-final distribution to me. Another had been sent to me after finalization. The third contained an approval reference without a matching review email in the preserved chain I was shown. My first reaction was almost relief. 1 legitimate review. That meant the system was not entirely fabricated. Then, the worse implications settled in. Whoever had been doing this knew what a legitimate review looked like. The phrase had not been invented at random. It had been borrowed from the real process. Elaine moved to the next record. I noticed the program tag before she said anything. Next chapter mothers. Then another. Community visibility campaign. Then another. Maternal workforce panel series. All connected to areas where Lauren had public responsibility. Elaine stopped sharing her screen. What do you make of that? The old version of me would have answered too quickly. Lauren. Instead, I said. Those are programs she benefits from professionally. That wasn't the question. No. What do you make of it? That the unsupported review language appears more than once around public-facing initiatives tied to her role. Does that prove she caused it? No. Good. After the call ended, I sat alone at the table. 3 unsupported review claims. All connected to the part of Bridge Forward my sister had been promised would elevate her. The pattern was tightening, but it still did not tell me who had pulled it. My phone buzzed. Mom. For 1 second, my hand moved automatically. Then I remembered the boundary. Work questions in writing. I let the call stop. A message appeared. We need to talk in person. This has gone too far. 10 minutes later, Dad sent a location. A private dining room attached to a quiet restaurant on the Upper East Side. No explanation. No request. Just a time. I almost refused. Then Mom emailed. This is about your future at Bridge Forward. That got me. Not because I trusted the phrase. Because, for years, I had wanted someone in my family to admit I had one there. The restaurant was half empty when I arrived. Mom and Dad were already seated. A folder rested beside Mom's plate. Of course it did. She smiled when I came in. Not warmly. Professionally. Thank you for coming. I sat across from her. What is this? Dad frowned. Can't we have dinner first? No. Mom exhaled. You see? This is what I mean. Everything has become adversarial. You told me this was about my future. It is. She opened the folder. A proposed organization chart. My eyes went immediately to the title below Executive Director. Deputy Executive Director Maya Reynolds. For a moment, the room became very quiet. Not externally. Inside me. The title was one I had imagined before, never seriously enough to ask for. Bridge Forward had grown large enough that Mom needed a true second in command, but every time the subject came up, she said we were not ready for more bureaucracy. I had always understood what that meant. More authority for me. Now there it was. Under my name. Mom slid a second sheet across the table. Compensation. A raise. A substantial one. Expanded access to board meetings. Authority over grants administration, finance coordination, and program compliance integration. Everything I had spent years being responsible for, without being permitted to control. Dad leaned forward. This is not punishment, Maya. Your mother is trying to bring you closer. I looked at Mom. Why now? Because the organization needs stability. That isn't what I asked. Her expression tightened slightly. Because you have demonstrated how important governance is to you. I have demonstrated that for 11 years. You've also demonstrated recently that you are ready to stand up. The sentence almost made me laugh. By reporting something? By acting like a leader. I touched the edge of the organization chart. What would you want from me? Mom's shoulders relaxed. The question sounded like negotiation. She believed we were negotiating. We need to clean up the current situation. What does clean up mean? The board concern is being reviewed. If there were documentation inconsistencies, they can be corrected. And the wedding? Dad seethed. For God's sake. Mom ignored him. The private resolution still makes sense. The one I refused to sign. It can be revised. What part? The confidentiality language can be narrowed. So, I take this job, we call the governance problem a documentation cleanup, and I agree not to discuss Lauren's wedding incident, unless required. Mom stared at me. You make everything sound sinister. I repeated what you offered. I am offering you influence. There it was. The word she knew I wanted. Influence. Not responsibility. Not usefulness. A seat. A real one. You have wanted a place at the table for years, she said. The ache that moved through me embarrassed me. Because she was right. I had. Every budget I repaired. Every deadline I saved. Every donor restriction I explained twice because Lauren had promised something first and checked whether it was allowed second. Some part of me had always believed there would be a day when Mom looked around and said, Maya has earned authority equal to what she carries. Now, the paper sat in front of me, and instead of feeling recognized, I felt priced. Why did I need a crisis before you decided my seat was real? Mom went still. Dad leaned back. Maya, don't do this. Mom answered first. Because now I know you're ready. My fingers left the paper. No anger. No dramatic realization. Just clarity. You knew I was ready when you put my department's name on board reports. Her jaw tightened. We are not discussing the review here. We're discussing my readiness. You are twisting this. No. I pushed the organization chart back toward her. I'm declining. Dad stared at me. What? I don't want the position. Mom did not touch the paper. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous. You are about to have a child. This gives you security. That landed harder than the title. Money. Insurance. Paid leave. A known organization. A salary I could plan around. Pregnancy made courage expensive. Mom knew that. Or maybe she simply understood leverage better than I wanted to admit. You're offering security? I said. Inside the same structure I'm questioning. I'm offering you the authority to improve it. After I agree to make the problem smaller. That is not what I said. Then, tell me I can take the job, leave the whistleblower review completely untouched, refuse any family confidentiality agreement, and say whatever the board requires me to say. Mom's face gave me my answer before her mouth did. The end quote. This organization cannot survive if everyone insists on acting independently. I stood. Dad said my name sharply. Mom looked up at me. You will regret turning down an opportunity because you are angry. Maybe. That was the first time I had ever allowed my mother to predict a consequence without rushing to prove she was wrong. Maybe I'll regret it. I picked up my coat. But a promotion is not payment for my silence. The subway ride home felt longer than usual. By the time I reached our apartment, my confidence had begun leaking out through practical questions. What if she was right? What if refusing was not brave but reckless? What if Bridge Forward eventually terminated me? What if another employer saw a 40-year-old pregnant applicant coming out of an internal governance dispute and decided to choose someone easier? What if the baby needed something expensive? What if Noah resented carrying more financial weight? By the time I unlocked the door, self-respect had turned into a spreadsheet. Noah was at the kitchen table with his laptop open. I dropped my bag. I turned it down. The meeting? The job. He looked up. What job? She offered me Deputy Executive Director. His eyes widened. That sounds significant. It was. Do you regret saying no? Yes. The answer surprised both of us. I sat down. I also don't want it. Those can both be true. I hate when you say reasonable things. So I've heard. I pulled a notebook toward me. If I leave Bridge Forward, we need numbers. That conversation lasted almost 3 hours. Savings first. Then, our fixed expenses, housing, food, the amount I had been quietly spending on work clothes, lunches near the office, transportation, future childcare, medical costs, then insurance. That was the number that made me sit straighter. My Bridge Forward plan was better than Noah's employer plan in several ways. Lower deductible. Better maternity coverage, structure. If I resigned after whatever transition came next, I would lose it. Noah pulled up his benefits portal. A loss of other coverage should qualify you to enroll through mine. I know. You say that like it's bad. It's more expensive for family coverage. How much more? We calculated it. The increase was not catastrophic. It was not nothing either. Then came the deductible and out-of-pocket differences. I wrote each number down. Noah asked, Cobra? Fallback. Why? Keeping my current plan would mean paying much more of the premium ourselves. He whistled when I gave him the estimate. Okay. Fallback. We built a reserve around his plan instead. Extra premium. Higher possible out-of-pocket spending. Newborn costs. 6 months without assuming. I found another full-time job immediately. When we finished, the number at the bottom frightened me. It also freed me. We could do it. Not comfortably. Not indefinitely. But we could do it. For the first time, refusing Mom was not an emotional gesture. It had infrastructure. The next morning, I removed her from my emergency contact list. That hurt more than turning down the promotion. My finger stayed over the screen before I confirmed it. Then, I added Noah as primary and one longtime professional colleague as backup. The hospital portal came next. Approved visitors. Birth preferences. No automatic family access. No assumption that grandma overruled patient. After that, I turned off the location sharing I had forgotten was still active from years earlier when Mom insisted everyone keep it on for safety. A small gray toggle slid left. That was all. No explosion. No one knocked on the door. Then I opened my resume. For years, the first line of my professional summary had included Bridge Forward's name because I had been proud of it. I deleted the organization from the opening sentence. What remained was mine. Grant compliance. Multi-year funding portfolios. Reporting systems. Internal controls. Restricted fund oversight. Process design. Board documentation. I sent 2 emails to professional contacts from consortium work. Neither message asked for a job. Both said the same basic thing. I might be considering a transition later in the year. If they heard of project-based grants or process work, I would appreciate being kept in mind. Then I closed the laptop. That afternoon, Elaine contacted me for another committee interview. The preserved email appeared on screen halfway through the call. At first, nothing about it looked dramatic. Routine subject line. A draft board packet chain. Several recipients. Then, one sentence. Leave Maya off this draft, she's overloaded. We can reconcile later. My eyes stopped moving. Elaine did not speak. I read it twice. Can you scroll up? She did. The sender field came into view. Executive Office. I stared at the address. Then, the signature. Diane Reynolds. Mom. The timestamp was 3 days before the corresponding board briefing had been finalized. Scroll to the final packet. Elaine opened it. There was the same line I had already seen. Grants Administration reviewed the classification. My throat tightened. Who wrote the instruction? Elaine answered by pointing the cursor at the sender header. No interpretation. No speech. No accusation. She did not need one. Mom had instructed them to leave me off the draft. The official record later represented my department as having reviewed it. That did not tell me everything. It did not tell me whether she had personally changed the final sentence. It did not tell me who else knew. It did not prove every classification was wrong. But one excuse disappeared forever. She could not claim she assumed I had reviewed that draft. She had specifically told them not to send it to me. For years, I had wondered whether my mother underestimated my work because it happened behind the scenes. Sitting there, reading her email, I understood something worse. She had not forgotten what I did. She knew exactly what my review was worth. That was why my department's name made the board packet stronger. That was why grants reviewed mattered. That was why it had been useful even when grants had not reviewed anything. My expertise had never been invisible to her. It had been available. Elaine's voice pulled me back. Maya. Yes. Tell me what this proves. I looked at the email again. That she knew I was excluded from this draft. Anything else? The final board packet later states that grants reviewed the classification. Anything else? I wanted to say she used me. I wanted to say she had been doing it for years. Instead, I took a breath. No, not from this record alone. Elaine nodded. Good. The call ended 20 minutes later. I sat there looking at my own reflection in the darkened screen. My phone chimed. An email. From Mom. For one irrational second, I wondered whether she somehow knew what I had just seen. Then I opened it. Maya, I need you to confirm that you were aware of these adjustments. We both know you reviewed them informally, even when the final documentation was handled by others. I am trying to protect everyone from turning process differences into accusations. The first time through, anger blurred the words. The second time, training took over. I opened my chronology. Official board wording. Reviewed and approved. Mom's new wording. Aware. Informally. Those were not the same thing. Not remotely. I began typing. Official record describes formal grants review and approval. Executive Director now characterizes Maya's involvement as informal awareness. My fingers stopped. Then, I read the sentence once more. For years, Mom had trained me to doubt my reactions. She had never trained me to doubt a version history. My mother thought that email would pull me back into line. Instead, it gave me the first sentence of my evidence summary. The first sentence of my evidence summary took less than a minute to write. The rest took 2 days. That was because anger was fast. Accuracy was not. My mother's email stayed open on one side of the screen while my chronology grew on the other. Official record describes formal grants review and approval. Executive Director now characterizes Maya's involvement as informal awareness. Under that, I added the corresponding document number. Then the date. Then the final wording. Then what I had actually done. Then what supporting review trail should have existed. Then what the preserved record showed instead. No adjectives. No motive. No sentence beginning with, my mother wanted. I could not prove what she wanted. I could prove what she wrote. By the end of the first morning, the document had become almost painfully boring. That reassured me. A dramatic accusation could be dismissed as emotion. A timestamp was less cooperative. One entry showed a board packet finalized before supporting material had ever reached me. Another showed my department credited with approval despite no pre-final distribution. A third showed the phrase changing from pending grants review to grants administration reviewed and approved. Then came the preserved email Elaine had shown me. Leave Maya off this draft. She's overloaded. We can reconcile later. And, later, the final board wording. Reviewed. Approved. I did not write that Mom had lied. I did not need to. The documents were beginning to argue with one another all by themselves. Noah found me at the dining table after noon, with half a sandwich untouched beside my laptop. You planning to eat that? Eventually. That's what you said 40 minutes ago. You timed me? I live with a grants administrator. I've adapted. He slid the plate closer. My eyes stayed on the chronology. Read this sentence. I thought I wasn't supposed to review evidence. You're not. Read the sentence as English. He leaned over just enough to see the line I pointed to. No supporting record located showing review by grants administration before finalization. Does that sound accusatory? It sounds like something designed to ruin somebody's afternoon. That isn't what I asked. No. It doesn't sound accusatory. I exhaled. That was the hardest discipline. Not making the story sharper than the proof. Not filling every gap with what I feared had happened. A part of me wanted to write that Mom had used my reputation because she knew the board trusted me. The records suggested it. Her behavior made it plausible, but suggestion was not proof. So I wrote instead. Official board language attributed a control function to grants administration, where the supporting trail does not establish that control occurred. The sentence had no emotion in it. My hands did. By late afternoon, they were shaking again. Not from fear of the committee. From the realization that every clean sentence made it harder to go backward. There had always been a way back before. Apologize. Call Mom. Say I had been overwhelmed. Let Dad say everyone had made mistakes. Agree Lauren had been under pressure. Promise not to bring up the wedding around the holidays. Return to work. Fix the reporting. Keep moving. That path was still available. I could see it clearly. It was simply becoming more expensive to choose. My phone lit up with Lauren's name. This time she had texted first. Can we talk? Scheduled. I won't come over. I stared at that for a moment. At least she had listened to one boundary. I gave her 20 minutes that evening. Her face appeared on my screen from what looked like her apartment. No makeup. No polished lighting. No bridge-forward backdrop. I heard the committee is looking at my campaigns, she said. I don't know everything they're looking at. Mom said they froze one of my approvals. I'm not discussing committee activity I haven't been authorized to discuss. Lauren flinched. You sound like work. I am discussing work. This is because of the wedding. No. It started after the wedding. That isn't the same thing. She leaned closer to the camera. If I hadn't done what I did, would you have gone looking? Probably not. That answer hurt. No, I said. Her mouth tightened, as if she had won something. Then I continued. But the wedding didn't create the records. The expression disappeared. It made me look. That's all. Lauren rubbed her thumb against the edge of her phone. I didn't know your name was being used. I watched her. Not because I could read the truth from her face. Because I wanted to see whether she would add anything without being pushed. She did not. What did you know? I asked. That Mom moved things around sometimes. What things? Budgets, categories, timing. That is vague. I'm not a grants person. You requested campaign money. Yes. You knew where it came from. Not always. That's a problem. Her eyes flashed. You think I was supposed to audit my own mother? No. My voice stayed level. I think you were supposed to know what authority you had before spending money under it. That's easy for you to say. Why? Because you always knew every rule. I learned them. The words came out before I could soften them. Lauren looked away. I thought about all the times she had walked into my office with a new campaign idea and said, Mom already said yes. How often had I explained the actual budget afterward? How often had Mom called me rigid when I told Lauren something required a different funding source? How often had the final solution involved me rearranging deadlines until the promised thing became possible? Lauren spoke again. You're going to take Mom down because of me. No. Her eyes came back. The wedding made me look. It did not create the records. You keep saying that. Because you keep trying to combine them. What difference does it make? A large one. I leaned closer to the screen. What you did to me at the wedding is one issue. What happened in board records is another. I am not trading one for the other. I apologized. You said you were sorry. What else do you want? Nothing tonight. Her face changed. That answer bothered her more than anger would have. For years, wanting something from Lauren had kept us connected. An apology. Acknowledgement. A changed behavior. If I wanted nothing, she had no immediate way to bargain. Before ending the call, I said, if someone conducting the review asks what you knew, tell them what you knew. Obviously. No, not obviously. She stiffened. Don't shape it around what protects Mom. Don't shape it around what protects me. Say what you actually knew. Lauren stared at me. I'm not promising anything to you. Good. Promise it to yourself. I ended the call before either of us could turn that into another fight. The next morning, an email arrived from one of the professional contacts I had reached out to. Her name was Tessa Monroe. We had worked together on a regional workforce consortium 2 years earlier. The message was modest enough to feel real. Nothing permanent here right now. But a coalition I advise may need short-term help later this year mapping grant controls and reporting workflow. If you're still looking after your leave, I can put you in touch. No job. No rescue. No miracle salary. Just proof that Bridge Forward was not the edge of the earth. I read the email twice, then saved it in a folder labeled Next. That word felt strange. For more than a decade, my future had always meant the next reporting period, the next board packet, the next grant renewal. Now it might mean somewhere else. Later that afternoon, I worked on my resume. Not the polished version that said I supported executive leadership at a nationally recognized nonprofit. The honest one. I built restricted fund tracking systems. I standardized reporting calendars across programs. I created approval workflows. I managed multi-year grant portfolios. I trained program staff to document outcomes in ways that could survive both donor enthusiasm and an audit. None of those sentences needed my mother's name. That evening, I opened the nursery registry Mom had started helping with before the wedding. Half the items were things she liked. Monogrammed blankets. A particular white crib, she said, photographed beautifully. A decorative rocking chair twice the price of the one Noah and I had chosen. One by one, I removed them. Not because the objects had done anything wrong, because I wanted to know what our home looked like when no one else was staging it. Noah found me comparing 2 plain bassinets. Big night. I'm reclaiming the nursery through boring consumer research. That sounds extremely on brand. I smiled. Then the smile faded. Do you think I'm overcorrecting? By choosing a bassinet? By cutting them out of everything? He sat beside me. You didn't cut them out of everything. It feels like I did. You stopped letting them assume access. The distinction landed. Access. My mother had always treated access as something given by blood. My time. My work. My home. My medical information. My forgiveness. My silence. Maybe a boundary was simply the moment access stopped being automatic. The formal submission was ready the following morning. Elaine met with me by secure video. She had not seen the completed chronology yet. That mattered. The final decision to submit it was still mine. What are you asking the committee to do? She said. Not what outcome did I hope for. Not what punishment did my mother deserve. What was I asking them to do? I had rehearsed the answer. Verify whether the board was repeatedly given a false impression that grants administration performed review it did not perform. Elaine waited. Correct the record where necessary. Another pause. And separate approval authority from anyone responsible for creating or maintaining that impression while the review continues. Are you asking the board to terminate Diane Reynolds? No. That answer surprised me by how easily it came. I'm asking them to fix the control problem. If fixing it affects her authority, that consequence belongs to the board. Elaine nodded. Ah, are you ready to submit? My heart started pounding. No scissors. No shouting. No one holding my arm. Just a button on a secure page. This felt more irreversible than the wedding. Because this time, nobody else had forced the moment. I had built it. Yes. A signature box appeared. I typed my name, then clicked Submit. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Elaine finally said, "The committee will proceed under the policy." I closed the laptop after the call. The apartment looked exactly the same. That was almost offensive. I had expected the room to acknowledge what I had done. Instead, sunlight lay across the rug. The dishwasher hummed. Somebody in the building upstairs dropped something heavy. Life had no ceremonial instinct. Mom called an hour later. I did not answer. Dad called next. Then, a message arrived. "We are coming over." I replied immediately. "No," Mom responded. "Then meet us downstairs." That was the compromise I accepted. Public lobby. No entrance into our apartment. No Lauren. They were waiting when I came down. Mom stood near the windows in a dark coat. Dad had both hands shoved into his pockets. Neither greeted me. Mom spoke first. "You filed it." "Yes. You could still withdraw it before the board meets." "No." Her face tightened. "Do you understand what you are doing?" "Yes." "No, you understand paperwork. That is not the same thing." I almost smiled. It was such a familiar distinction. My competence counted when it helped her. When it challenged her, it became narrowness. "You told staff to leave me off a draft," I said. Dad looked at Mom. I noticed that. Not because I knew what it meant. Because it told me the sentence was not one he had been prepared to hear. Mom did not deny it. "You were overloaded." "The final packet," said my department reviewed it. "The department is larger than you." "Who reviewed it?" A pause. "You are reducing an organization to one email." "No." I kept my voice quiet. "I'm reducing this conversation to one question." Her eyes sharpened. Everything I did was to protect Bridge Forward. There it was. Not denial. Justification. "You protected your authority by borrowing my credibility." Dad stepped in. "This has gone far enough." I looked at him. "Because of the retirement plan?" His face reddened. "That is not the only thing at stake. But it is one of them. Do you understand what happens if she loses this job?" "Yes." "No, you don't." We went through the numbers. Mom stared at me. "What numbers?" "Mine." Something in her expression shifted. I continued. "Insurance. Savings. Maternity costs. What happens if I leave Bridge Forward?" "You're planning to leave?" "I'm planning not to be trapped." Dad gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You think Noah can carry everything?" The question hit exactly where it was meant to. Old training. If a woman chose something for herself, make her prove she was not becoming someone else's burden. "No," I said. "That's why we made a budget." Mom's voice dropped. "You would throw away 11 years because you are angry with me." "I'm not throwing them away." "Then withdraw the complaint." "No." Her jaw set. "I built that organization." "I know." "Women depend on it." "I know." "Staff depend on it." "I know." "Your father and I built our retirement around the years I had left there." "I know." Every answer made her angrier because she could not turn ignorance into my excuse. "You know all that," she said. "And you're still doing this?" "Yes." Dad stepped closer. "Then, don't expect us to stand there pretending everything is normal when the baby comes." That sentence went through me cleanly. No warning. No build-up. For several seconds, the lobby became nothing but the sound of the ventilation system above us. Mom said nothing. Neither did I. A part of me begged for repair. Tell him that was too far. Ask Mom whether she agrees. Remind them this is their first grandchild. Give them a door back in. Then my daughter moved inside me. A small pressure beneath my ribs. I rested my palm there. "That's your choice," I said. Dad stared. Mom finally spoke. "Maya." "No." My voice broke slightly, but the words survived. "You do not get to use whether you show up for my child as leverage over whether I tell the truth about work. We are not leveraging anything." "Then there's nothing to discuss." Mom looked at me for a long time. "You have changed." That was supposed to hurt. Maybe it did. But not in the way she wanted. "Yes." I went back upstairs alone. The elevator doors closed before my face changed. By the time I reached our floor, breathing had become difficult. Noah opened the door and took one look at me. "What happened?" "They might not come when she's born." He stepped toward me. I raised a hand. "Don't tell me I don't need them." He stopped. "I wasn't going to." "Good." Because I did need something. Not their authority. Not their money. Not permission. But I had wanted my mother there. That grief deserved to exist without becoming a reason to surrender. So I sat on the floor just inside our apartment and cried for the mother I had expected to have when I became one. Then, after a while, I got up. The committee review continued for another week. I knew only what Elaine was authorized to tell me and what I was shown in scheduled interviews. The preserved records supported several of the concerns in my chronology. Multiple final packets represented Grant's review without a corresponding support trail. Material wording changes had moved through executive office workflow. Several outreach and branding expenses connected to next chapter mothers required a fresh classification review. Mom's email about my informal awareness did not match the formal language used in board materials. Elaine was careful with every word. "So, what does the committee conclude?" I asked. "The committee is not concluding criminal conduct. I didn't ask it to." "I know. I'm being precise." I almost laughed. "That sounds familiar. The current finding is a governance failure." The board was given representations about a control process that the supporting records do not consistently substantiate. Hearing someone else say it did not feel triumphant, it felt heavy. What happens now? The board is considering interim measures under the bylaws while the final review continues. I was not in that board meeting. I did not hear their debate. I did not know who defended Mom, or who criticized her. The decision came to me through an official notice and a follow-up call with Elaine. Diane Reynolds would temporarily lose unilateral authority over budget approvals and board briefings connected to the reviewed areas. An interim executive lead would handle those functions. Lauren's discretionary campaign approval authority was suspended. Affected classifications would go through independent finance and compliance review. Mom would no longer direct employees responsible for maintaining records under the protected review. I read the notice twice. Founder. Still. Executive director. Still. For the moment. But parts of the job that had allowed her to define the record were no longer hers to control. My phone stayed quiet for almost an hour. Then Mom sent one line. "I hope you're proud of yourself." I stared at it. There had been a time when that sentence would have destroyed the entire day. This time, I did not answer. Pride was not what I felt. I felt grief, relief, fear, a strange emptiness where obligation had lived. Then Elaine called. "There's one more issue." My stomach tightened. "What?" "The board wants continuity through the transition." I assumed that. "They specifically asked whether you would consider leading the grant and controls transition." I closed my eyes. Of course they had. Elaine continued. "There may also be discussion of an interim executive role later, depending on the final review." The old ache appeared immediately. A seat at the table. Authority. Recognition. This time, no mother offering it with a condition. No Lauren ahead of me. No years of waiting. The board finally needed exactly what I knew how to do. 3 weeks earlier, I would have heard that as victory. Sitting there with my hand over my daughter's movement beneath my ribs, I heard something else. Another emergency. Another room full of people looking toward me because I knew how to fix what someone else had broken. "For how long?" I asked. "The transition?" "Yes. We can discuss scope." That word helped. Scope. Not destiny. Not duty. Not blood. Scope. "I'll review what they need," I said. "I'm not agreeing to an executive role." "Understood." After the call ended, the apartment grew quiet around me. On my laptop, my resume was still open beside Tessa's email about possible consulting work later in the year. On the coffee table sat 2 bassinet options Noah and I had not chosen between. In the hospital portal, my mother's name was no longer listed as an emergency contact. Bridge Forward needed me. Maybe more than it ever had. For most of my life, that sentence would have sounded like love. For the first time, the question wasn't whether they finally needed me. It was whether I still needed to be needed. The board's final notice arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was comparing 2 health insurance plans and trying not to think about my mother. That combination felt appropriate. One document concerned the organization she had built. The other concerned the life I was building without depending on it. The subject line from Elaine was plain. Final governance review. Notice to reporting employee. My hand rested on the trackpad for several seconds before I opened it. There had been a time when I imagined this moment differently. Some part of me had wanted a clean verdict. A sentence saying, I had been right. Another saying Mom had been wrong. Maybe even an acknowledgement that the daughter everyone called difficult had been the one protecting Bridge Forward all along. The actual notice was less satisfying and much more believable. The review had confirmed that several board records created a misleading impression that Grant's administration had completed reviews the supporting documentation did not substantiate. Internal controls had failed. Certain outreach and branding classifications would be reviewed and corrected where necessary. If funder terms required amended reporting or notification, Bridge Forward would handle that through the appropriate process. The final paragraph was the one I read 3 times. Diane Reynolds would step down from executive authority. She could retain a non-executive founder emeritus title. Interim leadership would continue while the board completed its restructuring. No accusation of theft. No dramatic criminal charge. No announcement that my mother had secretly been a monster for 20 years. Just the removal of the thing she had protected hardest. Control. I called Elaine. She answered on the second ring. I received it. I assumed you would. Is this final? The governance decision is. What happens to Mom's salary? That will follow her employment agreement and the transition terms approved by the board. I can't discuss details beyond what you're entitled to receive. Okay. I looked at the notice again. What about the organization? Still operating? That answer mattered. More than I had expected. So nobody is shutting programs down? Not because of this review. My shoulders dropped. Women who had never met me would still go to training. Staff members who had not altered a single record would still have jobs. The mission did not have to die because my mother could no longer own it, Elaine added. The board's public statement will be brief. How brief? She read it. Bridge Forward is implementing governance restructuring. Founder Diane Reynolds will step back from executive authority. That was all. Mom's name would not be dragged through headlines. There would be no public spectacle. The woman who had once asked who saw Lauren run at me with scissors would remain in photographs on the organization's history page. People would still thank her for what she had built. Some would probably never know why she no longer ran it. And yet, she would not control the budget. She would not control the board narrative. She would not be able to attach my credibility to a decision I had never made. I had expected revenge to feel louder. Instead, it felt like a lock clicking into place. Mom asked to see me that evening. For almost 10 minutes, I stared at the message. Just you and me, please. No apology. No accusation either. I agreed to meet her in a cafe near my apartment. Public. Neutral. No access to our home. She arrived early. Her hair was immaculate. Her coat was buttoned perfectly. If I had not known the board had removed her authority that morning, I would never have guessed anything had changed. She did not order coffee. Neither did I. For a while she looked at me across the small table. Then she said, "Was it worth it?" I knew what she meant. Still, I made her say it. Was what worth it? Humiliating your own mother. My chest tightened. There it was. Not the records. Not the controls. Not the board. Humiliation. I didn't remove you. You started this. I reported records that used my department's approval when the review didn't happen. You knew where that would lead. No. Her eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe that? Yes. That answer seemed to irritate her more than a defense would have. I asked the committee to correct the record and fix the control problem. I did not tell them what title you should keep. You knew the board was waiting for an excuse to weaken me. I didn't know that. She looked away. I let the quiet stay. For most of my life, Mom's discomfort had been something I rushed to repair. A joke. A concession. An apology. This time it belonged to her. When she looked back, her voice had hardened. You chose strangers on a board over your own mother. No. What would you call it? I chose a record that didn't change depending on who needed me quiet. Her mouth tightened. You always know how to make yourself sound righteous. The old shame flickered. Not strongly. Just enough for me to recognize it. Maya the difficult one. Maya the technical one. Maya who turned everything into rules. For years those labels had worked because I had wanted the person using them to love me more than I wanted to trust myself. That equation had changed. I didn't take your authority, I said. I stopped lending you mine. She went completely still. The sentence was not rehearsed. Maybe that was why it landed so cleanly. Mom picked up her purse. So this is it? I don't know. You don't know whether you want a mother? That isn't what I said. What else am I supposed to hear? You can have a relationship with me without controlling my work, my home, or what I'm allowed to say. Her fingers tightened around the purse strap. And my granddaughter? There it was. Not my pregnancy. Not my recovery. Access. You don't get automatic access to her because you're my mother. Her face changed. I continued before I lost the nerve. No unannounced visits. No showing up at the hospital unless I invite you. No using Dad to pressure me. And no telling me I caused what happened to you at Bridge Forward. You did cause it. Then we're not ready. She stared at me. I had spent years believing that setting a boundary required the other person to understand it. It didn't. They only had to encounter it. Mom stood. I hope someday your daughter never treats you the way you've treated me. That hurt. It was designed to. My hand moved instinctively to my belly. Then I said, I hope she never has to. Mom left without saying goodbye. 3 days later, Lauren requested another scheduled call. Her face looked tired when the video connected. I review outcome. I did not ask how she felt. What did it say? They didn't find evidence that I changed board records. I didn't say you did. I know. She swallowed. My discretionary spending authority is gone. I waited. They moved me under a different reporting line. Not Mom. That sounds appropriate. Lauren gave me a sharp look. There's a corrective action plan. That was the phrase she hated most. I could tell because she nearly whispered it. I have to get campaign spending approved before anything is committed. Formal check-ins. Performance review before I can be considered for senior responsibility again. For years, Lauren had lived in the space between Mom's verbal yes and everyone else's responsibility to make that yes possible. Now someone had installed a door in that space. They took me off. Next chapter, mothers, she said. I felt no triumph. Only recognition. And I'm supposed to act grateful that they're letting me stay. You don't have to be grateful. She looked surprised. You do have to decide whether you're willing to work under the rules. Lauren's gaze dropped. After a moment she said, I told them I knew Mom moved budget language around sometimes. My pulse changed. What exactly did you tell them? What I told you. I knew things got recategorized. I didn't know she was using your department like that. I could not verify every word she said. So I did not. That's between you and the review. She nodded. Then came the harder part. The wedding matter is still separate. Yes. My attorney is handling that. I did not ask for details. The police process had never been mine to negotiate. The venue footage remained with the venue and the authorities who had requested it. I had never sent it to Elaine. Never threatened Mom with it. Never told Lauren I would make it disappear if she cooperated at work. 2 events could come from the same broken household. Lauren stared at the screen. Then she said, I wanted you scared. The room seemed to narrow. She continued before I answered. I felt replaced. Mom had been telling me for months that I was the one moving forward. Then she stood at your wedding and made your pregnancy part of my initiative. Her eyes filled, but I stayed where I was. And when you looked at me like I was being ridiculous, I wanted you scared. For once, she did not say she had panicked. She did not say everybody misunderstood. She named what she had wanted. That was wrong, she said. Yes. I'm sorry. I believed she was sorry in that moment. That did not create trust. An apology is where you start, I said. It isn't access. Her face crumpled slightly. You're not going to let me meet the baby. I didn't say never. Then when? When your behavior tells me something your apology can't. That could take months. Yes. She looked offended. Then, almost amused. You really mean it? I do. The call ended without forgiveness. Strangely, that made the apology feel more valuable. Lauren had finally said sorry without receiving immediate relief in return. The board offered me the interim executive role the following week. Elaine delivered the offer in the same measured tone she used for everything else. The board believes your knowledge of the controls environment makes you a strong candidate for the transition. 6 months earlier, I might have interpreted that sentence as proof that all my sacrifice had finally paid off. Now, I asked, what exactly do they need from me? Grant calendar continuity. Control mapping. Documentation of reporting responsibilities. There is also interest in discussing an interim executive appointment. No. Elaine paused. No, to which part? The executive appointment. All right. I can give them 10 business days for transition. You're resigning? Yes. Have you accepted another position? No. That answer still scared me. But fear and wrong were not the same thing. I'm moving on to Noah's employer health plan. We've already checked the enrollment window triggered by losing my coverage here. We can carry the higher premium. And Cobra? Fallback. If something goes wrong with the switch. Elaine was quiet for a second. You've thought this through. I had to. Pregnancy had made every boundary measurable. How much did freedom cost per month? What deductible came with it? How many weeks could savings cover? How much pride could I afford? Apparently enough. I'll do 10 business days, I said. Documented transition questions only. After that, Bridge Forward needs to operate without me. Elaine did not argue. Send me the scope you're willing to cover. So I did. For 10 days, I mapped the grant calendar. Documented control ownership. Transferred reporting schedules. Answered questions in writing. When someone asked if I could just stay through the next board cycle, I said no. When another person asked whether I could remain available informally afterward, I said no again. My last day arrived without a party. I preferred it that way. I closed the laptop, returned the equipment, and walked out carrying less than I had brought in 11 years earlier. That frightened me too. 3 months later, our daughter was born close to her due date. There was no dramatic emergency, no cinematic reunion outside the delivery room. Just hours of exhaustion, Noah's hand in mine, fluorescent light, instructions from nurses, and then the impossible weight of a tiny person placed against my chest. Mom was not there. Dad was not there. I had known they would not be. Knowing did not stop the grief. At one point, after Noah fell asleep in the chair, I looked at my daughter's face and imagined my mother standing on the other side of the room. For a few minutes, I let myself mourn the version of becoming a mother I had expected. Then my daughter opened her eyes. She did not know what I had lost. She only knew whether I was there. So I was. An email from Tessa arrived during my leave. The workforce coalition she had mentioned months earlier needed short-term help rebuilding its grant calendar and review process. I read the message with my daughter asleep beside me. Old reflex. Say yes immediately. Prove you're still valuable. Get back in before they forget you. Instead, I replied, I can discuss a limited engagement after my leave. Then I closed my phone. 4 months after giving birth, I started consulting for them, 8 to 10 hours a week. No staff reporting to me. No midnight emergencies. No promise that I would own whatever came up. Grant calendar. Control map. Reporting workflow. Defined scope. During my 3rd week, the project lead called late one afternoon. We've got one additional issue. Could you just handle it? What issue? She explained. It was not in the agreement. Send the scope change in writing, I said. A pause. Then, of course. That was all. No one called me selfish. No one invoked sacrifice. No one reminded me who had helped me years ago. A work boundary had simply become a work boundary. I almost laughed after hanging up. 8 months after my daughter was born, I accepted a position as Director of Grant Strategy at a workforce collaborative. Not because Elaine arranged it. She didn't. Not because a donor made a call. Nobody did. The consulting work led to references. The references led to interviews. The interviews included questions I could answer because the work was actually mine. On my 1st week, my new supervisor sent me a board document for review. At the bottom was an approval field. Maya Reynolds, Director of Grants Strategy. I reviewed the document, made 2 corrections, approved it. My name appeared because I had actually said yes. The simplicity of that nearly undid me. One afternoon, I was packing my laptop while my daughter sat on the office rug beside me, attacking a soft fabric block with enormous concentration. My phone lit up. A Bridge Forward email. Emergency board meeting, your input would be valuable. For several seconds, I looked at the subject line. A year earlier, my body would have reacted before my mind. Open the laptop. Find the problem. Fix it before anyone else noticed. Be useful. Be necessary. Be good. My daughter made a delighted sound when she finally knocked the block over. I opened the message. Read it once. Then replied. I'm no longer part of the organization. Please direct governance questions to current leadership. Send. No explanation. No apology. I placed the phone face down. Beside it sat my new laptop bag. The nameplate was simple. Maya Reynolds. Not Founder's daughter. Not Lauren's sister. Not the one who fixed everything. Just my name. For the first time in my life, my mother had a crisis, and it did not become my assignment.